Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. If you've ever looked at a massive historical famine and thought, wow, that's just a terrible twist of fate or like a bad roll of the cosmic dice, well, the source material we're digging into today is going to completely flip that idea on its head. It turns out global starvation, it isn't random at all. Actually, it's entirely predictable. Think about it. For generations, the prevailing myth we've all been sold is that famine is just bad luck, right? A random drought, a sudden stroke of terrible fortune. But the uncomfortable reality is quite different. Famine is actually a civilizational failure. See, when we just write it off as bad luck, we're totally stripping away our own responsibility. But recognizing it as a systemic breakdown, that allows us to actually peek under the hood and see exactly why the machine broke in the first place. And we see this exact pattern of failure building throughout history. Back in antiquity, when the mighty Nile River failed to rise, terrified citizens thought the gods were punishing them with some apocalyptic curse. Jump forward to the 1930s, when the Great Plains of North America literally turned to dust and blackened the sky. Once again, people felt completely cursed by the weather. But they weren't witnessing a divine curse, and they weren't just unlucky. They were watching their own systems collapse. And here's the scary part, that exact same vulnerability applies directly to our future. So, to truly understand how this happens, we have to totally strip away all those historical myths. We need to start treating the environment like a highly intricate piece of machinery. Think about it like a car engine. When an engine stalls, you don't just blame bad luck, right? You pop the hood and you find the broken gear. Ecological collapse operates on those exact same strict scientific mechanics. Let's take the 1930 Dust Bowl as a prime example. This disaster didn't actually start up in the sky. It started right down on the ground with step one, soil depletion. Decades of relentless overfarming literally drained the earth of its structural integrity. Then, that barren ground began to interact with the atmosphere, which essentially locked in these massive high-pressure weather systems right above it. Rain just couldn't penetrate that high-pressure dome. The result? A prolonged, brutal drought that turned that already depleted soil into absolute dust. It's a completely engineered disaster that just compounds on itself. Now, you might be wondering, okay, how does atmospheric science connect to human leadership? Well, it turns out they are deeply, deeply intertwined. The mechanics of ecology directly dictate the politics of the time. And interestingly enough, our ancestors actually kept a pretty strict scorecard on this whole thing. We so often think of the ancient mandate of heaven as this mystical religious right to rule. But historically, it was actually a really early, ruthless form of natural resource management. An emperor's legitimacy was literally tied to their ability to maintain ecological balance. If the river is dried up and famine struck, it meant the emperor had fundamentally failed the mechanics of the environment. And you know what happened then? They were usually shown the door. I mean, you can just imagine these leaders nervously checking rain gauges right up until the end. It was a strict pass-or-fail test of leadership. So if we take these micro-level mechanics and combine them with this ancient political wisdom, we can actually zoom all the way out and apply it to our modern world. Because let's be real, this isn't just an explainer about historical blunders. This is about our ultimate survival as a species. And that brings us to a massive existential concept known as the Great Filter. In astrophysics, this is theorized as this invisible barrier that prevents civilizations from advancing across the universe. By reframing famine as a great filter, managing our natural resources stops being just a nice-to-have political talking point. It becomes a literal cosmic test. If a civilization cannot master the mechanics of its own ecology, the universe simply filters it out. It just disappears. So the big question is, how do we pass this cosmic test? While surviving the filter requires us to actively engineer and maintain the mechanics of our planet to prevent that step-by-step collapse we talked about earlier. And crucially, this demands global cooperation. A high-pressure atmospheric system, it does not care about national borders. The biggest takeaway you should get from this is that unified, global cooperation is literally the only engineered solution to ecological collapse. We either consciously choose to succeed together, or we just automatically fail. We've tracked the mechanics of famine from the dry banks of the ancient Nile through the choking dust of the 1930s, right up to the ultimate cosmic exam we're facing today. Famine is never just bad luck. It's a measurable, mechanical failure. So, I'll leave you with this final provocative thought for our explainer today. The next time you're watching the news, ask yourself, based on everything we've just uncovered, are we engineering our environment successfully right now, or are we about to fail the test?